On July 19th, Caitlin Clark led a bold pay protest at the WNBA All-Star Game, demanding higher salaries for players. But Stephen A. Smith wasn't having it. The ESPN host lit her up live on air.
Wait a damn minute. Higher television ratings, higher attendance figures. That doesn't come courtesy of a league.
According to Stephen, Caitlin's biting the very hand that fed her. So is she leading a revolution or going too far? Let's break it down. The bold statement that shook the WNBA. The brightest lights of women's basketball gathered in Indianapolis for the 2025 WNBA All-Star Game, millions of eyes watching from around the world, and suddenly, every single player walks onto the court wearing identical black shirts with 4 simple words that would ignite a firestorm of controversy. Pay us what you owe us. At the center of it all, none other than Caitlin Clark, the rookie sensation who has single-handedly transformed the landscape of women's professional basketball.
We should be paid more, and hopefully that's the case moving forward as the league continues to grow. I think that's something that's probably the most important thing that we're in the room advocating about.
Now, before we dive into the depths of this fascinating story, let's understand the magnitude of what happened during that All-Star weekend. You need to grasp just how seismic Caitlin Clark's impact on the WNBA has been. Consider these absolutely staggering numbers. Clark generated an estimated $36 million in economic impact for Indianapolis, and nearly 27% of the league's economic activity in 2024. Let that sink in for a moment. A single rookie player was responsible for more than a quarter of an entire professional league's economic activity. That's not just impressive, that's revolutionary. But here's the kicker that really drives home the absurdity of the situation. Despite generating this astronomical economic impact, Clark's 2025 salary is projected at just $78,066. To put that in perspective, that's roughly what a middle manager at a decent-sized company might make. Meanwhile, Clark earned an estimated $11 million from endorsement deals, making her WNBA salary represent barely 1% of her total earnings.
Where does your W salary stack up against your deals with State Farm, Gatorade, Nike?
It's a good question. Honestly, I feel like that's where we're really fortunate is that we have those other deals. And I think that's one of the things that we're in the room fighting for.
This disparity isn't just eye-watering. It's emblematic of a system that seems fundamentally broken when it comes to compensating the very athletes who are driving unprecedented growth and interest in the league. And Clark, despite being just a rookie, has become the face of a movement that's demanding radical change. The lead-up to that explosive All-Star weekend didn't happen in a vacuum. The WNBPA had opted out of the current collective bargaining agreement in October 2024, signaling that players were no longer willing to accept the status quo. With a massive new $2.2 billion media rights deal set to begin in 2026, the timing couldn't have been more perfect for players to leverage their growing popularity into meaningful financial gains. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, recognition, and the fundamental principle of being compensated fairly for the value you bring to your employer. When you consider that WNBA players currently receive less than 10% of league revenue compared to the NBA's 50-50 split, it becomes clear that this wasn't just about Caitlin Clark or even just about basketball. This was about workplace equity on a grand scale. The All-Star Game itself became the perfect platform for this message. More than 40 WNBA players, including Clark and Angel Reese, had met on Thursday to discuss the league's new collective bargaining agreement, and by Saturday night, their unified stance was impossible to ignore. As the cameras rolled and the players took the court for warm-ups, the visual was striking. Here were the biggest names in women's basketball, players who had spent years, sometimes decades, perfecting their craft and building the WNBA into what it had become, making a statement that transcended sport. Nafisa Collier, one of the league's biggest stars, had recently earned $200,000 in a single unrivaled 3x3 game, which matched her entire WNBA salary, perfectly illustrating the absurdity of the current pay structure. But Caitlin Clark's presence in those warm-up shirts carried additional weight. Here was the player who had become the undisputed face of women's basketball, someone whose mere presence could transform empty arenas into sold-out spectacles, wearing a message that demanded the league recognize not just her value, but the value of every player who had helped build the foundation she was now standing on. The moment was powerful, it was unified, and it was impossible to ignore. Players who had often been portrayed as having tensions with Clark, particularly around issues of recognition and media attention, were standing shoulder to shoulder with her, presenting a united front that said this wasn't about individual grievances or petty jealousies. This was about about collective action in the face of systematic undervaluation, and Clark herself didn't shy away from the message. When pressed about the salary disparities, she had already been vocal about the absurdities she witnessed. After winning the Commissioner's Cup earlier in the season, she noted that players earn more for that event, $30,000 per player, than for a WNBA championship, $20,825 per player, calling it nonsensical and urging Commissioner Kathy Engelbert to address the issue. The stage was set, the message was clear, the players were unified, but in the world of sports media, no story is complete until the biggest voices weigh in. And when it comes to basketball commentary, few voices carry more weight or generate more controversy than Stephen A. Smith. The question everyone was asking wasn't whether Stephen A. would respond, but how explosive that response would be. The media firestorm and Stephen A.'s complex relationship with the Clark phenomenon. In the immediate aftermath of that stunning All-Star Game display, something fascinating began to unfold in the sports media landscape. While social media exploded with reactions ranging from emphatic support to skeptical criticism, the most influential voices in sports commentary found themselves in an unexpectedly complex position. And at the center of this media maelstrom was Stephen A. Smith, whose relationship with the Caitlin Clark story had been anything but straightforward from the very beginning. Stephen A. Smith has been one of Caitlin Clark's most vocal defenders in the media, but not always in the ways you might expect. His support has come wrapped in layers of social commentary, economic analysis, and unflinching observations about race, resentment, and the realities of professional sports that have made some people uncomfortable and others nod in vigorous agreement. Let's rewind to June 2024, when Stephen A. made waves with his analysis of why some WNBA players Clark.
Now I've taken hits because I was calling it from day one. You got people that are resentful towards her. But it's really not about her, guys. It's about what she represents.
This wasn't just sports analysis. This was Stephen A. diving headfirst into the complex intersection of race, privilege, and professional sports in a way that few commentators dare to do. He wasn't content to simply analyze Clark's jump shot or her passing ability. Instead, he was examining the sociological implications of her success and the reactions it generated. But here's where Stephen A.'s commentary gets really interesting, and why his apparent silence on the salary issue becomes so intriguing. Throughout 2024, he consistently positioned himself as someone who understood both the value Clark brought to the league and the legitimate frustrations of players who had been grinding in the WNBA for years without receiving the recognition or financial rewards that seemed to come so easily to the rookie sensation.
And what I was saying to everybody is ride the wave. Rising tide lifts all boats. The girl is spectacular. It's not like she's not a scrub. She's not only can play, she's a star caliber player who draws this attention.
This rising tide lifts all boats philosophy became a central theme in Stephen A.'s Clark commentary. He wasn't just defending Clark against criticism, he was making the economic argument that her success would benefit everyone in the league. It's a perspective that aligns perfectly with the salary advocacy that Clark and her fellow players displayed during the All-Star Game, which makes his apparent silence on that specific event all the more noteworthy. The complexity of Stephen A.'s position becomes even more apparent when you examine his broader commentary about WNBA salaries and economic realities. In various segments throughout 2024, he had already laid groundwork that seemed to support exactly what the players were demanding. He had talked about the absurdity of players having to supplement their WNBA income by playing overseas. He had highlighted the dramatic increases in viewership and attendance that Clark's presence brought to the league, and he had consistently argued that her economic impact should benefit everyone. But Stephen A.'s commentary has never been just about economics. It's been deeply intertwined with his observations about race and privilege in professional sports. And this is where things get particularly interesting when we consider his response to Clark's own statements about her position in the league. When Clark was named Time Magazine's Athlete of the Year and made her now famous comments about white privilege in the WNBA, Stephen A. was quick to praise her self-awareness and advocacy.
If her heart has been in the right place, she deserves major kudos for her heart being in the right place. And then you're gonna have white folks out there talking about, she's knocking herself down or she's bringing up white privilege. Well, if you're white in America, in most instances, you are in a privileged position compared to people from other ethnicities. That is just a fact.
This kind of commentary showcases why Stephen A. West's perspective on the salary issue would be so valuable, and why his apparent silence on the All-Star Game protest becomes even more intriguing. He had already established himself as someone willing to engage with the complex racial dynamics of Clark's success, someone who supported her while acknowledging the legitimate grievances of other players, and someone who understood the economic realities that made the salary disparities so problematic. Meanwhile, the broader sports media landscape was grappling with how to cover the All-Star Game protest. Social media reactions ranged from strong support to criticism, with some fans questioning whether players should be making political statements during what was supposed to be a celebration of the sport. But the players themselves were unapologetic about their message. Nafisa Collier, speaking to reporters, emphasized that they were taking the labor battle very seriously, and that the strong participation in league meetings sent a message about their unity.
So both sides are going to fight really hard for it, and so we just have to make them know that we're not backing down on this point.
The economic arguments backing up the players' demands were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The WNBA had achieved record viewership in 2024, with 54 million unique viewers, largely driven by Clark's presence and the increased interest she brought to the league. Yet the league still reportedly lost $40 million in 2024, raising questions about the financial structure and revenue-sharing model that governs player compensation. This is where Stephen A.'s previous commentary becomes particularly relevant. He had consistently argued that Clark's impact on the league went far beyond individual statistics or team success. He had talked about how her presence led to chartered flights for teams, improved playing conditions, and increased visibility for the entire league. In essence, he had been making the same argument that the players were now making with their protest shirts, that Clark's value to the league should translate into better conditions and compensation for everyone. But there were also tensions bubbling beneath the surface that complicated the narrative. Some reports suggested that not all players were equally enthusiastic about the protest, with Los Angeles Sparks guard Kelsey Plum suggesting that Team Clark wasn't fully involved in the planning of the shirt demonstration. This kind of internal tension within the player ranks might explain why Stephen A., who had been so vocal about Clark-related issues throughout her rookie season, chose to remain relatively quiet about this specific protest. His previous commentary had often focused on the divisions and resentments within the league, and jumping into a situation where player unity might not have been as solid as it appeared could have been seen as counterproductive to his rising tide lifts all boats message. The media landscape around Clark had become increasingly complex throughout her rookie year. What started as a story about a talented college player making the transition to professional basketball had evolved into discussions about race, privilege, economic equity, and the future of women's professional sports. Stephen A. had been one of the few major media figures willing to engage with all of these complexities simultaneously, but that same willingness to tackle difficult subjects might have made him more cautious about weighing in on an issue where the internal dynamics weren't entirely clear. What Stephen A.'s response really reveals. Here's where this story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. While the internet was buzzing with speculation about Stephen A. Smith's explosive reaction to Caitlin Clark's salary demands, while social media was primed for another vintage Stephen A. rant that would generate countless clips and hot takes, the reality turned out to be far more nuanced, strategic, and revealing than anyone anticipated. Let's start with what Stephen A. has actually been saying about the economic realities facing WNBA players, because this is where his true position becomes crystal clear. In December 2024, on the Stephen A. Smith Show, he praised Clark's off-court contributions, noting her advocacy for higher pay for opposing teams at sold-out games, and her desire to highlight Black players' contributions to the WNBA. Think about that for a moment. Stephen A. was literally praising Clark for advocating for higher pay for other players, the exact same thing she was doing when she wore that "Pay Us What You Owe Us" shirt. But Stephen A.'s support for better WNBA compensation goes much deeper than just his comments about Clark. Throughout 2024, he consistently highlighted the economic impact that Clark's presence had on the league, and he framed this impact in terms of benefits for all players, not just Clark herself.
So the WNBA says they want to get paid more. They're saying this year they're going to make $1 billion.
The more you dig into Stephen A.'s commentary, the more it becomes clear that he has consistently supported the economic arguments underlying the players' salary demands. He has repeatedly pointed out that Clark's presence led to chartered flights for teams, something players had been requesting for years. He has highlighted the dramatic increases in attendance, television ratings, and merchandise sales that accompanied Clark's rookie season. Most importantly, he has consistently argued that these improvements should benefit the entire league, not just individual stars.
Rising tide lifts all boats. Whatever it takes for everybody to get fed, I'm all for it. You a WNBA player? Caitlin Clark gonna get you paid.
But here's where Stephen A. Duress' position becomes particularly sophisticated. He understands that the salary issue is inseparable from the broader social and economic dynamics that have shaped the WNBA since its inception. His commentary about resentment toward Clark, about racial dynamics in professional sports, about the economic realities facing women's professional athletics, all of this connects to the salary. Question in ways that simple "pay them more" advocacy might miss. Consider his response to Clark's own statements about privilege and the need to elevate Black women in the sport.
And people who were looking for an excuse to denigrate her in any way, their issue wasn't with her, it was with a bigger issue, and they may have been justified in terms of their thinking along those lines, but to aim their ire in her direction directly was foolhardy and not advisable, and it was a huge mistake on the part of people like Cheryl Swoops and others.
This is Stephen A. acknowledging the legitimate grievances behind player frustrations while defending Clark's role as an advocate for league-wide improvements. The hate narrative isn't just background noise in this salary discussion. It's central to understanding why Stephen A. has been so careful in his commentary, and why his apparent restraint on the All-Star Game protest might actually be his most sophisticated take yet. Let's start with the incidents that have fueled this narrative, because they provide crucial context for understanding the environment in which these salary discussions are taking place. The Chennedy Carter incident in June 2024 became a flashpoint when Carter committed a hard foul on Clark, knocking her to the ground with what many saw as an unnecessary shoulder check. Carter's subsequent comments that she had no regrets and her dismissive remarks about Clark only shooting threes added fuel to the fire. But here's where Stephen A.'s analysis becomes particularly valuable. Rather than simply condemning the physical play or joining the chorus of voices crying jealousy, he consistently contextualized these incidents within the broader dynamics of professional sports competition and the complex social realities of the WNBA.
You would think that you would be smiling, you would be ecstatic, you would be happy, and something like this wouldn't faze you at all. The fact that it does is disturbing. I'll leave it at that. When it comes to Caitlin Clark, now I've taken hits because I was calling it from day one.
This wasn't Stephen A. simply taking shots at players who were physical with Clark. This was him recognizing that the reactions to Clark went beyond normal competitive basketball, while still maintaining that Clark's presence should be viewed as beneficial to everyone in the league. The complexity of the situation becomes even more apparent when you examine the broader pattern of incidents that have fueled the hate narrative. Dejounai Carrington was accused of mocking Clark and accidentally poking her in the eye during a playoff game, leading to fan backlash and claims of intentional targeting. Players like Betna Delaney and Brianna Stewart were noted for particularly tough defense against Clark, which some interpreted as excessive or personal. But here's where Stephen A.'s approach differs from the hot take artists and social media flamethrowers. He consistently acknowledges that physicality is inherent in professional basketball, while also recognizing when that physicality crosses lines or seems motivated by factors beyond competitive strategy. The comments from established WNBA stars add another layer to this narrative that Stephen A. has had to navigate carefully. Aja Wilson's remarks about race playing a role in Clark's popularity, stating that it doesn't matter what we all do as Black women, we're still going to be swept underneath the rug, weren't necessarily attacks on Clark personally, but they highlighted the systemic issues that make discussions about her success so fraught. Stephen A. found himself in the unique position of someone who could acknowledge these legitimate concerns about racial dynamics in sports marketing while still defending Clark's individual contributions and advocating for her positive impact on the league. It's a balancing act that few commentators have managed successfully, and it helps explain why his response to specific incidents like the All-Star Game protest has been more measured than his typical approach to sports controversies. Diana Taurasi's preseason comments that reality is coming for Clark were interpreted by some fans as dismissive, though they could just as easily be read as a veteran offering realistic expectations about the transition to professional basketball. Cheryl Swoop's critique that Clark needed to win a championship to be considered among the all-time greats reflected standard sports debate about legacy and accomplishment, but Stephen A. saw through the surface-level interpretations to the deeper dynamics at play.
She is really not about her, guys. It's about what she represents. Before she ever came along, there were a lot of outstanding basketball players who happen to be black females.
This analysis gets to the heart of why the salary discussion and the hate narrative are so interconnected. The resentment that some players might feel toward Clark isn't necessarily personal. It's about a system that seemed to suddenly recognize and reward the value of women's basketball only when that value was embodied by a white player from Iowa. Stephen A's consistent message throughout his Clark commentary has been that acknowledging this systemic reality doesn't diminish Clark's individual accomplishments or her positive impact on the league. Instead, it creates an opportunity for honest discussion about how to ensure that the growth Clark has catalyzed benefits everyone who has contributed to building the WNBA. The social media amplification of these tensions has been particularly toxic. High-profile figures like Charles Barkley have called out WNBA players for being petty and jealous, while social media posts often frame conflicts in terms of race, sexuality, or simple envy of Clark's endorsement deals. Fan reactions have escalated tensions, with some Clark supporters making accusations of racism or homophobia, while others criticize Clark's fans for injecting race into competitive sports discussions. This toxic environment helps explain why Stephen A.'s approach to the salary issue has been so strategic. By focusing on economic principles rather than personal conflicts, by emphasizing rising tide lifts all boats rather than taking sides in perceived player feuds, he's tried to keep the conversation focused on substantive issues rather than inflammatory speculation. The racial dynamics cannot be ignored in this discussion. As a white, straight player in a league where many stars are black and/or identify as LGBTQ, Clark's marketability may benefit from systemic biases that have historically favored white athletes in terms of media coverage and endorsement opportunities. Aja Wilson's comments reflect this legitimate concern about how marketing and media attention are distributed in professional sports.
That is just a fact. It is undeniable. And her pointing out what she points out is what makes us lean towards an Aja Wilson, who just received a huge endorsement, did a huge contract, and you know what? She deserves it because she's the best in the world.
This strategic approach becomes even more apparent when you consider the financial realities Stephen A. has consistently highlighted. He has talked about the absurdity of players having to play overseas to supplement their WNBA income, noting that stars like Brittany Griner were playing in Russia precisely because WNBA salaries weren't sufficient to support them. He has consistently argued that league growth should translate into better player compensation. But perhaps most tellingly, Stephen A. has repeatedly emphasized that Clark's economic impact creates leverage for all players in salary negotiations. His analysis of Clark's effect on television ratings, attendance, and league revenue consistently frames these improvements as benefits that should be shared across the league, not hoarded by individual stars. The economic data backs up Stephen A.'s analysis in ways that make player salary demands seem not just reasonable, but inevitable. With a new $2.2 billion media rights deal starting in 2026, and with record viewership and attendance in 2024, the financial foundation for significant salary increases clearly exists. Even the challenges facing the league, like the reported $40 million loss in 2024, don't necessarily undermine the case for higher player compensation. As analysts like Dave Portnoy have pointed out, the WNBA's financial reporting is complicated by its relationship with the NBA, making it difficult to assess the true profitability of women's basketball operations. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.